In life, we often wrestle with the illusion of control, believing that our plans and efforts will chart the course of our journey. Yet true peace and purpose emerge when we learn to surrender our grip and yield to the wind of grace, much like a sailor trusting the breeze to guide his vessel. The Christian walk, symbolized by a sailboat, requires a deep trust in God's sovereignty. Just as Moses stood before the Red Sea, surrendering his fears and uncertainties, and trusted that God would part the waters. Similarly, Peter's steps on the water, full of faith, faltered the moment he looked away from Christ, a poignant reminder that surrendering our control allows divine miracles to unfold. As we navigate life's storms, Philippians 4:6-7 offers us the promise of peace, urging us to release our anxieties into God's hands and find comfort in His unchanging presence. In surrender, we discover not weakness, but the wisdom of trusting a greater plan than our own. Sailing with the wind of grace, the power of surrender. In the Christian journey, life often feels like sailing on an open sea, where the winds of grace are unpredictable and the waters are both vast and daunting. The struggle for control is constant, but there is a profound truth to be found. Only when we let go of our grip and yield to the wind of God's guidance do we find the course that leads to true peace. Much like a sailboat caught in a shifting wind, our lives take shape not by our control, but by our willingness to surrender to the divine current. Take Moses, standing at the edge of the Red Sea, faced with a seemingly insurmountable obstacle. Behind him, the Egyptian army is advancing, and before him lies an impassable sea. In that moment of desperation, Moses given a simple but radical command. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water, so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. Exodus 14:16. Moses' obedience in that moment was an act of surrender, surrendering his understanding of what was possible and trusting God's power to part the waters. He knew that no human strategy could overcome the Egyptians, but by yielding to God's direction, he witnessed a miracle that no human hand could have crafted. The waters parted, and the Israelites walked through on dry land. This miraculous event was not a display of Moses' control, but a testament to the power of surrender to God's will. Similarly, the Apostle Peter, bold and brave, took a step out of the boat to walk on water with Jesus. At first, Peter's faith allowed him to defy the natural laws of gravity and walk towards Christ. But his confidence faltered when he took his eyes off Jesus and focused on the wind and the waves. He began to sink, crying out, "Lord, save me." Matthew 14:30. In that moment, Peter teaches us a valuable lesson. The storm is not what causes us to sink, it is the loss of focus on Christ. The path to walking on water, literally and metaphorically, is a path of surrender. When Peter surrendered his fear and refocused on Christ, he was saved from the storm. The lesson here is clear. As long as we are focused on Jesus, our faith will sustain us through the storms of life. It is when we try to control the waves ourselves that we fall. This theme of surrender is echoed in the words of the Apostle Paul, who offers an antidote to anxiety. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Philippians 4:6-7. The act of surrender here is not passive resignation, but active trust. By surrendering our worries to God, we open ourselves to a peace that the world cannot understand. This peace comes not from controlling circumstances, but from trusting that God is in control. Just as the wind directs a sailboat's course, so is our life shaped by surrender to God's sovereignty. The boat does not dictate the direction of the wind, nor does it control the sea. It simply yields, adjusting its sails to catch the wind. Likewise, when we surrender to God's will, we allow His power to guide our journey, knowing He is the one who knows the path ahead. We may not understand the course, and the winds may not always be favorable, but in surrendering, we trust that God's wisdom surpasses ours. Surrender is not a weakness, but a wisdom that aligns us with the divine plan. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." This stillness is not a passive inactivity, but a recognition that the Creator is in control. When we cease striving to shape our own destiny and instead align ourselves with God's will, we find that His plans are far greater than anything we could orchestrate ourselves. So let us sail with the wind of grace. Let us trust God's timing, His wisdom, and His sovereignty. As we surrender our control, we open ourselves to miracles, just as Moses did at the Red Sea and Peter did on the water. And in surrendering, we find not only divine intervention, but also a peace that surpasses all understanding, a peace that is the true miracle of grace. God's unwavering love and empowering strength. Amid life's trials and uncertainties, a profound truth echoes through the pages of Scripture. God's love remains unwavering and transformative. This divine love is not a fleeting emotion or a distant concept. It is a constant presence, providing strength and endurance even in the most challenging circumstances. The story of Joseph is a powerful testament to this unshakable love. Joseph's life was marked by immense hardship. Sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, and imprisoned, Joseph faced betrayal, injustice, and isolation. Yet, through it all, God's love remained with him. In Genesis 50:20, Joseph reflects on the painful events of his life. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Joseph's suffering was not in vain. It was part of God's plan to save his family and an entire nation from famine. God worked through adversity to fulfill his promises and achieve a greater purpose. This truth is echoed in Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Even in the darkest moments, God's presence is with his people. What may seem like setbacks or struggles are often the tools he uses to shape, strengthen, and position us for his purposes. In the midst of trials, we discover the depth of God's unwavering love, which transforms our pain into something greater. Isaiah 41:10 offers a profound promise. "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." This assurance of God's strength is not just for times of peace, but especially for moments of struggle. When we face challenges that seem insurmountable, we are not alone. God's empowering presence sustains us, enabling us to endure and persevere. The ultimate example of divine strength is in Jesus Christ's life. In the Garden of Gethsemane, as he faced the imminent suffering of the cross, Jesus prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." Luke 22:42. Jesus did not seek to escape his pain, but surrendered to the will of the Father, finding strength not in avoiding hardship, but in trusting God's plan. His ultimate obedience and sacrifice exemplifies the power of divine strength in the face of immense trials. We are invited to draw on this same strength in our lives. Philippians 4:13 declares, "I can do everything through Christ who strengthens me." True strength is not found in our abilities or resources, but in the power of Christ working in us. Through him, we are empowered to rise above the challenges we face and overcome the obstacles in our path. God's strength is not just for times of victory, but for moments of weakness as well. In Corinthians 12:9, Paul shares a powerful insight. "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." It is in our weakness that God's strength is most evident. When we are at our lowest, his power is perfect, enabling us to endure and overcome. God's empowering presence is not just for the strong or the self-sufficient. It is for those who recognize their dependence on Him. We are invited to draw closer to God in our struggles and weaknesses, trusting that His strength will sustain us. As we surrender our challenges to Him, we find His power works in and through us, enabling us to navigate life's difficulties and emerge stronger on the other side. God's love remains constant in every season, whether of triumph or trial. He does not abandon us in our struggles. Instead, He equips us with the strength to endure, overcome, and rise above. His love is a transforming force that empowers us to live out His purposes, even amid adversity. As we journey through life, remember that God's love and strength are always with us. No matter our challenges, we can trust in His unwavering presence and find the courage to keep moving forward. In our weakness, His strength is perfect, and we find the endurance to press on in His love. Faith over fear, Caleb's triumph through trust in God. In the desolate wilderness of ancient Israel, a young shepherd named Caleb faced fear like no other. Night after night, he watched over his flock, his heart pounding at the howls of wolves and the rustling of unseen creatures in the shadows. The vast desert stretched endlessly around him, offering no refuge from lurking dangers. Yet, Caleb's story is not one of fear, but of unwavering faith, for he chose to replace fear with trust in God's promises. Caleb's courage was not born of his strength, but from the strength of the one he trusted. Isaiah 41:10 echoes this truth. Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen and help you and uphold you with my righteous right hand. In this declaration, God promises to be the source of Caleb's courage, strengthening him in his weakest moments and helping him overcome his fears. It was not his own might that kept Caleb's heart steady, but the knowledge that the Creator of the heavens and earth was his protector. In many ways, Caleb's journey mirrors great historical figures who, despite overwhelming fear, chose to persevere through faith. Take Nelson Mandela, for example, who faced unimaginable threats and trials during his fight against apartheid. Mandela could have been consumed by fear, yet he found strength in his belief that his cause was just, and his courage was rooted in something greater than his safety. Similarly, Caleb understood that his battle was not merely against physical dangers, but against the fear that sought to cripple his spirit. The wilderness was a place of physical peril and a battleground for Caleb's faith. Each night, as the wind howled and the darkened sky stretched before him, he found peace in God's promises. "The Lord is my shepherd," Caleb would repeat to himself, recalling the comforting words of Psalm 23. This declaration was more than just a comforting refrain. It was a profound reminder that just as a shepherd guards his sheep, God was watching over him, leading him through danger with steady hands and a watchful eye. True courage, Caleb learned, arises from trusting in God's presence rather than relying on personal strength. As the young shepherd stood alone in the wilderness, he understood that his challenges were opportunities to witness God's power and faithfulness. Fear, which had once threatened to paralyze him, was now replaced by the courage from knowing that God would never abandon him. This theme of faith overcoming fear runs deep throughout the Bible. In the face of overwhelming odds, God's people have been called to trust in His promises, as Caleb did. From the Israelites standing at the edge of the Red Sea to David facing Goliath, we see that fear is not the enemy. Unbelief is. When fear enters our hearts, it distorts our perception of God's power and leads us to believe that we are alone. But when we trust God, fear is driven out and we find peace even in the most uncertain circumstances. Caleb's faith was tested, but in the end it was proven stronger than the fear that had once threatened to overtake him. His story is not about a man who triumphed through his courage or strength, but one who trusted in the God who has never failed. As Caleb faced danger, he looked beyond the shadows of the wilderness and fixed his eyes on the promises of God, knowing that God would guide him through the darkness. As Caleb's story unfolds, we are reminded that faith transforms our circumstances and hearts. Amid trials, our faith is testimony to God's goodness and power. Just as Caleb's trust in God turned his fear into courage, so too can our trust in Him turn our struggles into stories of victory. Faith is not the absence of fear, but the presence of trust in God's sovereignty. Just as Caleb stood firm in the wilderness, so too can we stand firm in life's challenges, knowing that God is with us. When fear creeps in, remember Caleb's example and declare, "The Lord is my shepherd." Through faith, we find courage to face every fear, knowing God's promises will always hold. The perfect timing of grace, trusting in God's season. In the bustling rhythm of human existence, time often feels like a relentless stream, always rushing, always pressing. We plan, work, and wait. But too often our impatience can cloud our trust in God's divine timing. We tend to view time through the lens of our urgency, forgetting that the limits of human understanding do not bind God's perfect timing. His plans unfold in their appointed season, and we must learn to trust His process, even when it seems to delay our desires. Consider the analogy of a seed planted in the soil. Beneath the surface, unseen and hidden, the seed begins its work of transformation. We cannot hurry the process, and yet, in due time, the seed will sprout, grow, and bear fruit. This analogy offers profound insight into how God's purposes work. Just as a seed requires time to grow, so do God's plans for us develop in unseen spaces before manifesting in visible, tangible ways. One of the most poignant stories illustrating this truth is that of Abraham and Sarah. In Genesis 17, God makes an incredible promise to Abraham that he would become the father of many nations. Yet, years pass, and Abraham and Sarah grow impatient. They see their old age as an obstacle to fulfilling God's promise. Sarah, in particular, grows restless. She offers her servant Hagar to Abraham, believing that perhaps God's promise requires human intervention. The result is the birth of Ishmael, a son born out of impatience and misunderstanding. While this action may have seemed like a solution in the moment, it ultimately led to discord and conflict. The tension between Sarah and Hagar highlighted the painful truth that rushing God's timing can bring unnecessary heartache. But even amid this faltering, God's faithfulness remains unchanged. Despite their missteps, God honors His promise, and Isaac, the child of promise, is born at exactly the right time, just as God had promised. God's timing is not only perfect but purposeful. He works in ways we may not immediately understand, allowing for faith development and trust. Psalm 27:14 encourages us to wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. Waiting on God is not a sign of weakness but of strength. It requires courage to trust in a season of delay, to hold fast to the belief that God is working behind the scenes, even when nothing seems to be happening. Romans 8:28 reminds us that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him. God's delays are not denials, but part of His perfect plan to grow and shape our faith. Just as a gardener patiently nurtures a seed, trusting that it will grow into something beautiful in time, so too does God patiently cultivate His purposes in our lives. Each delay is a divine opportunity for growth, a chance for our hearts to be strengthened, our trust to deepen, and our faith to be refined. Impatience is not only an emotional struggle but a spiritual one. When we rush ahead of God, we often miss the lessons He intends to teach us in the waiting. We forget that the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, is cultivated in the spaces where we learn to trust, wait, and endure. In the story of Abraham and Sarah, the lesson is clear. God's promises are not bound by human time, but by divine grace. Trusting in God's timing requires surrender. It requires us to let go of our sense of urgency and rest in the knowledge that the Creator of the universe knows exactly what we need and when we need it. As the gardener does not hurry the growth of a seed, so does God nurture our lives at His own pace, knowing that the harvest will be worth the wait. Let us then learn to wait with expectation. Let us trust that God's delay is not a denial, but a perfect work of grace. As we wait, let us be strengthened in our hearts, knowing that every season has a purpose, and every delay is an invitation to deepen our faith. For in the fullness of time, God will bring forth His promises, and the fruit of our waiting will testify to His faithfulness. The symphony of creation, a divine masterpiece. In the grand narrative of the universe, creation stands as a testament to the greatness and intentionality of God. From the intricate dance of the stars to the delicate petal of a flower, each element of nature whispers the truth of its creator. The beauty and order in the world around us are not mere accidents of chance, but deliberate acts of divine artistry, a symphony composed by the hand of God. As Job faced his trials, God posed a profound question. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Job 38:34. This question, echoing through the centuries, reminds humanity that creation is not random. It is a masterpiece, carefully designed with purpose and intention. Every mountain, river, and valley speaks of God's sovereignty, declaring His glory in ways that words cannot fully capture. In the New Testament, Jesus draws attention to the lilies of the field as an example of God's care and provision. Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, He says. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Matthew 6:28-29. If God cares for the fleeting beauty of flowers, how much more does He care for us, His beloved creation? These words invite believers to trust in God's provision, knowing that His attention to the smallest detail of nature reflects His loving care for every aspect of our lives. Psalm 19:01 declares, "The heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of His hands." From the vast expanse of the cosmos to the hidden intricacies of a single grain of sand, the entire created order testifies to God's greatness. In all its glory, nature is a living, breathing sermon of divine creativity. Each element reveals something unique about the Creator's character, His power, His wisdom, His love, and His faithfulness. Like a grand canvas, the heavens invite us to look upward and behold the majesty of the One who designed it all. Yet it is not only in the grandeur of the universe that we encounter God's presence, but in the quiet moments of reflection. Nature offers a sanctuary for believers to draw near to the Creator. The stillness of a forest, the rhythm of the waves crashing on the shore, the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. These moments invite us to pause, reflect, and connect with God on a deeper level. In the beauty of nature, we find solace and a sense of wonder that brings us closer to the heart of our Creator. Practical lessons abound in nature for those willing to observe. The patience of trees, standing firm through seasons of change, teaches us about endurance and trust in God's timing. The guidance of birds, soaring through the skies without fear, reminds us to trust in God's direction for our lives. And the renewal found in the changing of the seasons points to God's faithfulness to bring new beginnings even after times of hardship. Nature is not just a passive backdrop to our lives, it is a teacher, offering us lessons that shape our understanding of God's character. Nature, in all its forms, invites us to wonder. It beckons us to look deeper, see beyond the surface, and recognize God's hand in every detail. The beauty of creation is not just for our enjoyment. It is a call to worship. Each leaf, each flower, each bird that takes flight is an invitation to draw closer to God, to acknowledge His greatness, and to give thanks for His endless creativity. As we reflect on the symphony of creation, let us remember that it is not merely a backdrop to our lives, but a reflection of God's love and faithfulness. It reminds us that we are part of a much larger story that points to the Creator of all things. And as we marvel at the beauty around us, may we be drawn into deeper communion with the One who made it all. The sacred dialogue, the power of prayer in the life of faith. In the hustle of everyday life, where the world's noise drowns out all other sounds, a quiet invitation exists to step aside and listen. In the stillness of prayer, the believer enters into a sacred dialogue with God, a holy connection that transcends time and space. Prayer is not just a ritual or a list of requests, but a profound conversation that allows the soul to draw near to its Creator. It is in this act of communion that transformation occurs. Like a compass guiding a lost traveler through unfamiliar terrain, prayer is a divine guide for believers navigating life's uncertainties. It is easy to become overwhelmed by the storms of life, but prayer helps center the heart and mind, offering God's direction and clarity. As the psalmist wrote, "I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my loving eye on you." Psalm 32:8. Prayer opens the believer's ears to the voice of God, gently leading them on the path of righteousness. Consider the steadfast devotion of Daniel, whose prayer life stood firm despite the life-threatening dangers he faced. In Daniel 6:10, it is written, "Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before." Even when his very life was at risk, Daniel's prayer was an act of defiance, a declaration of trust in God's sovereignty. In the face of adversity, prayer was his refuge, strength, and unwavering connection to the divine. Yet prayer is not always a means to escape hardship. Jesus' prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane offers a poignant illustration of prayer's true transformative power. As he knelt before the Father, his heart heavy with the weight of impending suffering, he prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will but yours be done." In this moment, Jesus did not pray for the removal of his burden, but for the strength to endure it. In this context, prayer is not about avoiding trials, but receiving the grace to persevere through them. In our own lives, prayer holds the same transformative potential. The whispered strength carries us through our darkest hours, the breath of life that sustains us when we are weary, a mother's prayer for her child, a worker seeking guidance for a challenging decision, a broken heart lifted in prayer. All are examples of how prayer touches every aspect of life, bringing healing, peace, and the presence of God. Through prayer, we experience the divine exchange. Our burdens for His peace, our confusion for His wisdom. The Apostle Paul reminds us in Philippians 4:6-7 that prayer can transform anxiety into peace. "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus." Prayer becomes how our worries are transformed into trust, our restlessness into calm. In a world that seems bent on chaos, prayer offers the believer the unshakable peace that comes from knowing God is in control. But prayer is not a one-time event, but an ongoing communion with the Father. It is a continual process that shapes the believer's soul, refining their character and drawing them closer to God's heart. Through prayer, we are molded and transformed, ever growing in our understanding of His will and our reliance on His strength. As we engage in this sacred dialogue, we are invited to become more like the one with whom we converse. In the quiet moments of prayer, we find not only solace, but the very presence of God. In this presence, we are renewed, strengthened, and empowered to face the trials of life. Whether it is in the stillness of our hearts or the fervency of our cries, prayer is the constant thread that connects us to the divine. And in this connection, we are transformed. Creation as a reflection of God's greatness. In the beginning, when the earth was formless and empty, God spoke, and the world came into being. The story of creation, as told in the first chapter of Genesis, is not merely a historical account, but a profound revelation of the nature and greatness of God. Every sunrise, every mountain peak, and every river that flows is a testament to God's handiwork, reflecting His power, patience, and eternal faithfulness. Creation is a masterpiece of divine craftsmanship that invites us to marvel at its order and beauty. The precision with which the stars are hung in the sky, the intricate patterns of nature, and the harmony between the elements are all evidence of a creator whose wisdom and design surpass human understanding. The psalmist writes, "The heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of His hands." Psalm 19:01. These words remind us that every blade of grass and every droplet of water speaks to the majesty of the one who formed them. It is not only the grandeur of the cosmos that reflects God's greatness, but also the intimate details of creation. Consider the delicate balance of the natural world, the seasons that follow one another in perfect succession, the animals that find their habitats, the flowers that bloom and wither. Each element speaks to God's patience in sustaining the world He has made. In nature's order, we see that God does not rush. He allows the world to grow and flourish at its own pace, teaching us the importance of patience in our lives. This divine patience is mirrored in how God guided His people throughout history. Just as He called forth light from darkness, He called Abraham from the land of Ur and led him through years of wandering toward a promise. God's faithfulness to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their descendants shows us that God's guidance remains steady and unchanging. While we may falter and stray, the Israelites, wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, learned that the path to the promised land was not instantaneous, but a journey of dependence on God's provision. In the same way, we are invited to reflect on God's nature in our own lives. The challenges we face, the trials we endure, and the moments of growth are all part of the larger tapestry that God is weaving. Just as the earth takes time to form and grow, so too does our character. God's patience with us, His guidance through the Holy Spirit, and His unwavering faithfulness to His promises shape us into the image of Christ. The beauty and order of creation also offer lessons about how God works in our lives. The seasons change, and with each new season, life emerges and fades. In the same way, we experience seasons of growth and seasons of pruning. Jesus Himself used the metaphor of a vine and its branches to explain the relationship between Himself and His followers. "I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit." John 15:05. This imagery points to the truth that our spiritual growth is dependent on our connection to the source of all life. In the quiet moments when we pause to reflect on the world around us, we catch glimpses of God's greatness. A simple walk in a garden, the sound of a bird's song, the majesty of a sunset, remind us that the Creator is not distant but present in every corner of the world. His craftsmanship is seen in the smallest details, and His presence is felt in the grandest vistas. Yet, it is not only in the beauty of nature that we see God's greatness. It is also in the way He has chosen to reveal Himself to us. The Bible tells us that God's creation speaks of His character, power, and love. But it is through the life of Jesus Christ, the ultimate revelation of God's nature, that we see the full extent of His greatness. In Christ, we see a Creator who became part of His creation, lived among us, taught us, and ultimately gave His life for us. Jesus' life and sacrifice reveal God's power to create and His deep love and willingness to suffer on our behalf. We are reminded of our place in the world as we gaze upon creation. Just as God has crafted the universe with purpose and order, He has crafted each of us with purpose. We are called to reflect His greatness in our lives by living by His will, cultivating patience, seeking His guidance, and trusting His faithfulness. Creation mirrors God's divine nature in all its beauty and order. It calls us to reflect on His greatness, to recognize His handiwork in the world around us, and to respond with awe and gratitude. In the unfolding story of creation, we see not just the power of God, but His love, patience, and unwavering faithfulness. And as we embrace these truths, we are invited to join in the divine work of creation, growing into the fullness of who we were made to be.